Important things to know to get started in Resolve. First thing, how to get it. Visit Resolve's download page at Blackmagic Design's site and make sure to download the non-studio version. That's the free one, unless you have a Resolve license, in which case you'll obviously want the studio version. The license can be purchased online from a bunch of different retailers, but do avoid purchasing it from Apple's App Store, as Apple's sandboxing requirements have some restrictions. A Resolve license also comes with the purchase of most Blackmagic cameras, or if you've purchased Fusion in the past, the Fusion USB hardware dongle also works to run Resolve Studio. Each software activation key allows the software to be run on 2 machines, so Blackmagic's quite generous considering the software is only $2.99 to begin with, and that's for a perpetual and not a subscription license. And each of the softwares that now comprise Resolve once cost tens of thousands of dollars at some point in time. So there really isn't that much difference between the free and the paid software. There used to be almost nothing of consequence to the majority of users, but as Blackmagic has added features, particularly built-in effects, they've made several of those exclusive to the paid studio version only. That said, probably 90% of the work I've done would be easily possible with the free version of Resolve. If you want to know, these are some of the specific things that I miss in the free version. There's no collaborative projects, no scripting, no noise reduction, temporal or spatial, no motion blur, no color stabilizer effect, no deflicker effect, no dehaze effect as well, no camera solver, HEVC decode, and high-profile 10H.264 support, but that's probably it. Suffice it to say, if you don't know what some of those mean, you don't need the feature. So download Resolve, unzip the installer file, and run it. If you have an old version of Resolve, simply rename the folder in your applications directory, assuming you're on a Mac. And in that way, you can keep the older one. Like if there's a new beta that comes out, you want to try the features of the new beta, but keep the old version of Resolve. Just be aware if you do this, you will frequently see a red decoder error pop up. So Resolve's a powerful professional application. This means a little bit of upfront setup can go a long way in helping you get the best user experience. Before working in Resolve, understand these points. First, the database. So Resolve works a bit differently than you might be used to with other software. Instead of creating and saving a project file, everything you do inside Resolve is saved inside a database. Though this might sound intimidating, it really doesn't affect you in the day-to-day process of editing, but it does allow for a bunch of cool features like multi-person collaboration. You can't create a project inside Resolve until you create a database to house that project. And those databases come in 2 varieties, disk databases and SQL databases, specifically PostgreSQL. Disk databases are usually used in single-person setups where you're not sharing projects and media and the database can just sit inside your personal computer. If, however, you have multiple individuals in a facility and they all need to access the same projects or work on them simultaneously, then you want to use a network-friendly database built on the awkwardly named PostgreSQL. In this case, one machine acts as a server, the others act as clients, and they query the server, which is basically giving access to all the information related to your Resolve project. So to create databases, simply launch Resolve, make sure the database panel is expanded to the left where your local database will likely be selected just by default. Click the new database, and then make sure you're clicking Create and not Connect at the top. Give your database a name, it won't allow capital letters or spaces. Choose a location for the database, anywhere on your internal hard drive that has read and write privileges is fine, and you're set. Some scenarios further complicate things. If you frequently move between machines, you might want to make your database mobile. It's not difficult to put a database on an external drive, but it's also not necessarily the best practice. If, for example, an external drive disconnects mid-session, you're at much greater risk of corrupting the entire thing, and that means all the projects inside the database could be compromised. This isn't likely to happen. In all honesty, I've never heard of it actually happening, but the possibility is there, and the casualties are major enough it's generally not going to be your first approach. That said, if you work in multiple locations like a school, lab, and at home, you'll need to create your database externally so you can take it with you. You'll reconnect to this if you move to a different computer, and that's not hard at all to do. One note, Resolve external disk databases do not support the exFAT file system. This is an issue if you formatted a drive as exFAT for interoperability between Mac and Windows machines. exFAT's not a robust file system. While it works fine on memory cards, if you've got hard drive file systems are designed with several features that protect and optimize your data. Because there's no journaling with exFAT, an unintended disconnect is more likely to cause you to irretrievably lose vast amounts of data. Unfortunately, there's no perfect solution, but if you want to use a drive with Mac and PC, sticking to just HFS Plus or APFS or NTFS and using like a Paragon plugin is probably your best bet. Or you could partition your drive with a Mac and a Windows section, and that works for some cases. Okay, so now you're somewhere else and you need to access the database from another computer. Relinking to a database on an external hard drive is simple. You open Resolve, click the New Database button at the bottom, but this time instead of Create, you want to connect to an existing database. So click the button in the upper left. The name field here doesn't have to match what you used initially. You're basically just renaming your new connection to the existing database. Now click the location bar and then click the very top level folder of the location where your database resides, and it will automatically find the database within the directory. All that being said, it's still possible to export a project file from Resolve, and it may be an easier solution for you. There are 3 ways to do it. Simply press Command E on the keyboard, or go to File, Export Project, or right-click in the project window when Resolve opens, which is also accessible via the home icon in the lower right, and export the project with a right-click from there. This will create a project file similar to Adobe Premiere's .proj projects. That doesn't contain any media, however. The size of many projects is often just kilobytes of data. This is simply the project you're working on, its settings, timelines, their edits, the color, audio, effects, information. The actual media needs to be moved along with the project to make the whole thing usable. Another important thing to remember here is that this project file will not be modified unless you once again go through that same process of exporting. Pressing Command S or initiating a save operation from the menu, it'll simply save your open project's changes back to the database, not to a previously exported project file. There are a couple other things in Resolve you've got to set before proceeding. First, come down and hit this gear for project settings, or you can hit Shift 9 on the keyboard. Under Master Settings, look for Working Folders. The first of these is your cache files location. Cache files are designed to facilitate smooth playback, they hold audio waveforms and more, and they're stored here. Resolve can behave unexpectedly if you don't set this path to a place on your hard drive that you have read-write access to. You'll also want to make sure the Gallery Stills location is defined, as this is where your Resolve will store your custom look reference files once you get into color. It's also not a bad idea to navigate to the Capture and Playback area and set your capture path while you're in project settings. Any voiceover recording or studio video capture that you do will use this directory. As of Resolve 16, you can now change the resolution of individual timelines within a project, but you can define the default resolution here in project settings as well. If you're working with 4K footage downscaled to a 1080 timeline, for example, you can set your project to 1080 resolution. Deliverable files can still use the source resolution if you'd like to export to 4K, but timelines and project settings now have resolution independence, which they didn't have previously. So hit Command comma to go to Preferences, or hit Resolve Preferences in the menu bar at the top. These are general settings that apply independent of the project that's open in Resolve. There's a lot of useful stuff here, but make sure to click the User button and define your save settings under Project Save and Load. Especially useful is Live Save, which will auto-save any changes as you work on the project, so if Resolve does crash, your loss should be minimal. There are lots of other useful settings to consider. Playback preferences to optimize performance, scaling and color preferences to make sure footage coming in looks the way you want it to. We'll cover all that stuff later, but for now, congratulations, you're up and running with DaVinci Resolve.